Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to be doing a little lecture on the evolution of the idea of Satan from the Hebrew Bible through to the New Testament in anticipation of our reading of Revelation 12 and talking about the War of the Dragon. So let's get started. First of all, I wanted to talk about the name itself. It's not actually a name, it is a title. So we have in Hebrew Hasatan, and the first character ha is the definite article in Hebrew. So literally it is the adversary or the accuser. And this term Satan occurs 27 times in the Hebrew Bible with the meaning an adversary or the adversary. And you can see those listed: Numbers, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st Kings, 1st Chronicles, Job, Psalms, and Zechariah. And what's important to remember is that when we normally encounter this term, it's used of a human being, and it is usually in a negative light. But when it comes to Hasatan among the divine council, it's a different story. So let's talk a little bit more about that. The first major occurrence of the term that usually gets translated in English Bibles as Satan, the first occurrence is from the book of Job. And Hasatan, the definite article, is present, so it is a title, not a name yet. Hasatan is among the sons of God. If you remember from your Hebrew Bible class, you will remember that Yahweh develops over the course of time in Israelite history from being one of the sons of the high god El to being the high god of the pantheon, which is what we see in the book of Job, to eventually the monotheism of Judaism much, much later. And so here we have Yahweh as the top dog, top god, and he presides over his divine council, which are his sons, among whom Hasatan is one of them. So here, Hasatan is working on behalf of God's best interests. Hasatan is not an evil being, not a devil, not anything that we have come to associate Hasatan with as we do now. And so Hasatan has been roaming about the earth and looking and checking in on people, making sure that they are doing what is right by God for the right reasons. And Yahweh tells Hasatan to consider Job, his perfect, blameless servant. And Hasatan says, oh no, Job is only righteous because you've rewarded him. You need to test him and see if he's really righteous because you are the one to worship, or is he just doing it because you're nice to him? And so Yahweh, being the sole one in control, says, well, fine, you can kill his children and you can take away his property and destroy his land, but don't touch Job. And so Hasatan, on Yahweh's orders, does just that. So Hasatan, again, is not doing anything to Job that is not sanctioned by Yahweh. And then eventually Yahweh gives Hasatan permission to also afflict Job's body. And then, of course, if you've read the rest of the book, Job suffers tremendously, maintains his innocence to the very end, and debates with his friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Then Elihu, bless his heart, comes on the scene and tries to say something. And Job demands a day in court with Yahweh. Yahweh basically says, who are you? You're nobody. How dare you question the creator of the hippopotamus? And throws Job's case out on a technicality. And Job finally throws up his hands and says, fine, I'm done. And Yahweh rewards him with double what he had because Job was in the right, and Yahweh says that Job was in the right. So we don't see Hasatan past the first couple of chapters of the book of Job. But again, he's not evil, not a devil, only working on behalf of God's best interests. Next, in Zechariah, which is a post-exilic book, we have another occurrence of Hasatan. And in chapter 3 of Zechariah, we see Joshua standing before a messenger of Yahweh and the adversary, the accuser, Hasatan, is standing at his right hand to oppose him. So little angel demon situation got going on his shoulders. Again, the definite article is present. It is a title, not a name. Here, Hasatan doesn't speak at all, but he is again working on behalf of God's best interests, accusing Joshua of not being clean enough to be high priest. Well, Yahweh cleans his clothes and says, fine, he's clean now. He can do the job. He can be high priest and lead my people. So again, Hasatan, not a devil, not evil, just working on behalf of God's best interests. The final reference I want to talk about is from First Chronicles, and this one's a little dicey. It's questionable. This is the latest book that we have that references it in the Hebrew, that references Hasatan in the Hebrew Bible. And here there isn't actually a definite article, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a name yet either. So to refresh your memory, First Chronicles 21, the Satan or a Satan, an adversary, incites David to take a census. David does so and gets punished. And this is in comparison to the same exact account in 2 Samuel 24, where it is Yahweh who incites David to take the census and then gets angry with David for doing so and punishes David. And so the chronicler comes along and is trying to reconcile this issue that he sees in 2 Samuel. He's kind of rewriting the history a little bit and shifting things to make sense of what's going on. And so how does it make sense that Yahweh would tell David to take a census and then get mad at him for obeying Yahweh's orders? That doesn't make sense to the chronicler. And so the chronicler adds in this adversary that is the one that makes David take a census. And so it could be read that this is Satan, or it could just be any general vague adversary. And at the end of the day, the chronicler is making Hasatan a scapegoat for Yahweh. And that's the whole term around scapegoat, and why a goat is now representative of Satan. That's a whole other reception history that we could go into, but I won't do that this time. So overall, there's this progression from some of the older literature to the newer literature in the Hebrew Bible, where Hasatan is not evil or nefarious and is only working on behalf of God's best interests, except in Chronicles here. But again, we don't know if it's a title or just an adversary, any general human adversary. So I want to talk about the historical context of all of this. So you'll remember that Israel is never a major power player in the ancient Near East, and they are continually being dominated by other foreign nations. So you have in 722, the Assyrians come along and deport Israelites, the northern nation of Israel. Then in 587, you get the Babylonian exile. And then Persia comes along in 539 and defeats Babylon and lets the people return to their homeland. And actually, the Persians allow them to start rebuilding their temple, which, of course, the Judeans are going to see this as wonderful. And indeed, they call Cyrus the Great the Messiah, because he delivers them from the Babylonian oppression under which they had been suffering for several decades. Under the Persian domination, this is important because this is, again, the 6th century BCE, and the Persian religion is a dualistic religion called Zoroastrianism. And in Zoroastrianism, you have Ahura Mazda, who is the wise lord, and Angra Mainyu, which is the destructive spirit or destructive mentality. And so there is this concept of a good deity and a bad deity, which is not present in Israelite religion up until this point. Zoroastrianism has a very large impact on the notion of a good deity and a bad deity for subsequent Judaistic sects, and then subsequently also Christianity. The views of heaven and hell are starting to develop with the influence of Zoroastrianism. And then, of course, you get the Greco-Roman religions that also impact the ways that the Israelites start to view what happens after death and what are the different forces in the world that are at work either on their behalf or against them. So at this point, I would have asked you for some names of Satan as you might know them, and you'd probably name Beelzebub, Beelzebul, and then, of course, Lucifer. So where the hell did Lucifer come from? So Lucifer is the Latin name for the planet Venus, and Venus is the morning star. This is important because Venus in the night sky is seen as this heavenly entity striving for the highest seat of heaven, only to be cast to the underworld. And of course, these several mythologies are developed around this and they echo the motions of the planet Venus. We can see them in myths such as Etana and Inanna's descent to the underworld. You can also think of stories in the Hebrew Bible with Adam and Eve reaching out to be like God, and the Tower of Babel, where people are trying to reach highest heaven only to be cast down and their language is confused, or they are sentenced to misery or troubles and strife. So Lucifer, though, and this idea of Venus, the morning star, comes from the Latin translation of Isaiah 14. In Isaiah 14:12, it says, "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star." So how you have fallen from heaven, Lucifer. And this is a reference to the king of Babylon in Isaiah, not to a supernatural being at all. Again, it's following these myths that see someone striving to be more than they ought to be, and only to be cast down and rejected ultimately. And this is where Revelation 12 comes in. The great dragon was hurled down, the serpent, Satan. And so this is a reference back to Isaiah 14. Revelation is borrowing from Isaiah 14. And this, again, is just a reference back to these old mythologies about the planet Venus. Finally, just a fun little thing that I wanted to share is that in 2 Peter 1:19, we see Peter talking about people maintaining their faith until the morning star, in this case, Jesus, rises in your hearts. And so if we were to read the Latin translation, it would say, "Until Lucifer rises in your hearts," which is just a little ironic. And so that is, in a nutshell. I could go into a lot more detail, but I won't. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm happy to discuss anything that I've talked about so far. But thank you all. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know if you have any questions. Bye.